I am Dr. Amy Thompson, and I am the program coordinator here at UCA in the Department of Elementary Literacy and Special Education for the Graduate Reading and Dyslexia programs. And I teach primarily in that program now because we have a lot of students. So um, when I get a chance, I try to work with the undergrads. I love working with them too, but the need right now has been with the graduate program. So I'm happy that you're joining us today. I am going to share with you 10 things I wish I had learned as a reading teacher. So before we get started, I would love to see who all is here. So if you all would put in the chat box for me where you're from, what you do, we can see who's here today. School psych specialist, boy, we need those. Glad to see you here. We have a nice diversity. We've got psych examiners, classroom teachers, library media specialists, administrators. Fantastic. Well, we have a nice group today. So I'm very informal. Feel free to just pop in that chat and ask questions as we go along. Before I get started, I will do the obligatory, let me share with you about our graduate programs. So if you are looking to add on either an endorsement rather, or a master's, then these are our list of online programs. We're fully online. So we have a variety from technology to educational leadership, if you're wanting to be a principal or a superintendent, gifted and talented, instructional technology, library media, school counselors, special ed, and then of course, mine that I would certainly work to get you to because I think it's so very, very important, the Master's in Reading with the Dyslexia endorsement. I do like to always tout about UCA that we're the only institution in the state of Arkansas that's accredited by the International Dyslexia Association. So that's pretty exciting for us. We are currently going through reaccreditation and should find out soon. And we're hoping to be able to expand our offerings in dyslexia after that. So just to share with you a little bit, this is based on an article that I wrote for the Missouri Reader, and I have a link for you here. I'll share a link to the presentation so that you'll have these. But, you know, the funny thing about publishing is they give you this thing called word limits. And if you're a reading person, or like me in the least bit, you can't say anything in a few words. So it was supposed to be the 10 things I wish I'd learned as a reading teacher. And within my word limit, I could only get 4. So the article there goes into some detail about the 4 things, but I have expanded for you today a little more so that we actually get to those 10 things. What kind of led me to wanting to share this is, you know, I taught in Little Rock School District. I'm excited to see Little Rock people here today. For about 14 years, I was in the elementary. I taught 4th grade and then 3rd grade. I did my own interventions. I became very aware and friends with our psych examiners and our specialists team. So I was able to ask them lots of questions and invite them into my classroom and learn a little bit that way. But, you know, after I came to UCA and decided that I wanted to pursue my doctoral degree, I went to training at the Apple Group. I don't know if anyone here has been through that. I see a few nods, but they have the OG and 3D program, and it is on the state approved list. And I remember sitting there in the training thinking, I can think of Connor and Amorie, and I was just naming names in my head of the students that I wish I had known some of those things, because boy, had I failed them. And so there was a lot of beating up in that room. And I bet that happens a whole lot, because pretty much everyone there that day was doing that, because as teachers, that's just what we want to do. We want to do everything we can for our kiddos. So it was very eye opening to me, the things that I hadn't learned in school. And I had had an undergraduate degree. I was and still am certified elementary 1 through 6. Somehow they gave me that middle school social studies. I'm not sure how, but I do have that. Nobody would want me to teach that. Yes, laughers in my room. And then I went back and got my reading specialist. And you think if you go so far as to get your reading specialist, and then I worked on my national board in literacy, and that is just some amazing professional development that you do. You would think that you knew how in the world to teach reading. And lo and behold, I learned that I didn't know one thing, it seemed like. So I just want to share a couple of the, I guess, big aha moments for me today. And then at the end, would love to hear from you all and see what you're experiencing. So starting off at the beginning, the very first thing that was super eye-opening to me are the very bleak statistics. And I really got into these when I was working on my dissertation and studying under Dr. Kim. She's a dyslexia guru. And so working with her and doing some research and getting into the statistics, it was just really bleak. And it was very hard for me to accept too when I heard the statistics, because, you hear that only 37% are proficient. That was one of the statistics when I began. And I think, well, I had a classroom and they could read, and I didn't have very many that struggled. So how in the world are they getting these numbers? But then, you go into other schools and other districts and other parts of the state, and other classrooms just next door. And you find you're lucky. Those kiddos that are in your room came to you already lucky, because they knew how to read, and they whatever had been done instructional wise had worked for them. But there are a whole lot of kiddos that what we have been doing doesn't work for them. And we had a lot that were falling through our cracks. And that's where the statistics, I think, are very eye opening. So just to give you a few today that I pulled out, this is from the Central Arkansas Literacy Council, or the Arkansas Literacy Council rather, so that you could see just a little bit, especially to our state. Looking at adults, in the United States, we have 43 million adults that struggle with literacy. So when we think, okay, so they struggle with literacy, yeah, that would be difficult. But when you really dig into it, it's so much more. If you just sat in a day and made note every time you read something, every time you had to read something, you would be amazed at the number of times during a day that you use those skills. And for when adults are struggling with literacy, it doesn't only affect them, it affects their kids, because they're not going to be able to read to them and help them with their homework. It affects their earning potential, because that is very limiting in the job market. And then even when you think about, and this was one that I didn't think about initially, but even reading a prescription drug label. When your kids have a fever and you need to give them some Tylenol and find the dosing, not being able to do that, that's just hitting at the core. 8.4 million of our adults fall below the basic level of literacy skills, and then 20 million of our immigrants are not proficient in speaking English. When we look specifically at Arkansas, 495,000 adults function at or below basic literacy skills. 14.8% don't have a high school diploma. And I'll tell you, of those ones that are left that do have a high school diploma, they can't all read. And in Central Arkansas alone, almost 100,000 adults have below basic literacy skills. When we look at the NAEP, this is the one that we really look to when we're looking at our kids and their achievement results. We can see from 1998 to 2017 to 2019, we're not moving a whole lot here. We did come up from 98 in our advanced population. Our proficient in our proficient, our basic stayed pretty stagnant. But if you'll see 2017 to 2019, those are pretty similar statistics there. Not that we're not on track with the rest of the nation, but it's still, this is not good. When we look and we see in 2019, only 24% of these students scored at a proficient level. 7% were at basic. So that's 31% of our students could read how they should be able to read. And that is a big problem. So the statistics are extremely eye-opening, and you can find so much more than that just digging. There's a lot about, looking at prison populations and their low reading abilities and how predictors that they're finding with more research that these low reading scores are leading to. So it's just very, very eye-opening if you have not dug into that. So the second thing, and this is probably the most important or the most eye-opening, I guess, maybe important thing, the second one is that I wasn't crazy, because when I graduated from my undergraduate program, I left praying I would teach an upper grade, because I didn't know a thing about how to teach anybody to read. I had not learned anything, because when I was going to school, they had this thing called whole language. And we were taught, and it's true, it is not exaggerated. We were taught, if you just keep putting books in kids' hands, eventually they're going to be able to read. Just put them in front of their hands. Well, I don't know if anyone that's seen kids lately could see sometimes they don't even turn those books the right way. So they're certainly not going to be able to read them. They're using pictures to guess. There's some memorization of some words, or they're coming up with their own stories. They're not just learning to read because somebody put a book in front of them. And I thought, I did think, at least when I left college, that doesn't sound right. And so I was just praying, please, no kindergarten, first grade, second grade, because I knew they would be in big trouble. But unfortunately, guess what? Even in third and fourth grade, they come to you and they're not able to read. And so you still have to figure out what in the world to do. So then I began working on my master's work pretty much immediately after starting teaching, because I knew that this osmosis thing didn't work. And we learned about balanced literacy. And I tell you, I love a lot of things about balanced literacy. And I think that we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater, for sure. but there are a lot of things that balanced literacy is missing. So I think if we get past that, we're not trying to make everyone just do phonics kill and drill all day long and there's nothing else to do. If we can look past that, that's not what's being said, and see that there really are pieces of balanced literacy done correctly that are still being endorsed. We're still teaching comprehension. It's still realized as the thing about reading. You still should be using good literature. It's just, we have to figure out how in the world do we get them there? Because clearly just putting a book in front of them didn't make them figure out what the words are. So, doing a little bit of investigation as I have been learning more even since. This is a link to Louisa Moats's Reading is Rocket Science. And if you have not read that, I would suggest it. She did update it in 2020. So if you haven't read the updated version, again, I'll share this link with the presentation with you so that you can access that. Because, you know, you find out that reading is not innate. We don't come born ready to read. We have to build those neural pathways. So to build those neural pathways, we've got to do some teaching. There's a reason, you know, that we do what we do. While being read to is incredibly important for kids when they're learning to read, and even after they're learning to read, it's not going to teach them how to read. And I think that's what we have to think about when we hear this comment. Because I have talked to many parents with a child with dyslexia, and when they keep hearing, if we read to our kids, they're going to be able to read, they feel really insulted and really hurt. Because guess what? They're reading to their kids and it's not working. It's because they need instruction in the way that they need to be taught. Reading is not passive. That's where the not being osmosis. We have to be actively engaged, actively working. And, you know, the thing that I tell my students all the time when I am watching them and giving them feedback on their interventions, the teacher shouldn't be working harder than the kid. We too many times think that we have to be, you know, what's that old saying, the sage on the stage? And we have to get up and do all the talking and ask all the questions. And if the kid doesn't know a word, then we just need to give it to them because we don't want them to feel bad. You know, that is incredibly important. Self-esteem is a huge issue when dealing with students with really reading difficulties. But when we do that, we're not helping them. We're doing them a huge disservice because they are not figuring out by working on their own with you guiding them and being there for that automatic, immediate corrective feedback. And they're being passive. They're not the active ones here, and that's really important. It's also interesting to know that guess what? You can't memorize all the words that you might encounter when you're reading. And that's what a lot of kiddos do. I see so many that struggle with decoding because they don't know how. They don't understand phonics. It hasn't been taught to them. And so when they encounter a word that they've never seen before, there's nothing, because it's one that they just haven't gotten to yet and been able to memorize because, you know, of seeing it so many times. There's a whole lot of words out there. You're not going to ever be able to memorize them all. Eventually, that compensator that's making it by memorizing the words is going to hit a wall. And this is one that I've seen recently. If you are not on Facebook and in the group what I wish, let's see, the science of reading, what I wished I learned in college, something like that. Um, you'd need to go find that group because it is incredibly interesting. There are a lot of researchers that comment in there, and I just see something new in there every day that that's just exciting to me. And one thing that I saw was, this has been in the last couple of days, Dr. Louise Spear Swirling, she's one of my very favorite researchers. And she said the word shape is completely useless for teaching children to read words. In fact, it is worse than useless. It's maladaptive practice. And this is why, because, I used to do this. I bet some of you used to do this. We had the shape boxes, and if you could look at it and just try to remember the shape of the word, I don't know. I can't even explain it now because it didn't make any sense then. And it really doesn't now that I do know a little better. But if we look at the word cheap and the way that it is shaped, look at all of the words on the right-hand side of the screen that, if we did a word box, are shaped exactly the same way. So that's all the words a kiddo could come up with instead of the word that they're supposed to be reading, if we're teaching them just to look at a shape. So that's just some of the things that I know that I used in my classroom, because that's what I was taught, and in professional development, what I was taught and what was supposed to work, that doesn't. So the third thing that I thought about that I wish that I knew is how incredibly important oral language is to literacy development. I couldn't possibly cover all of this today, but I have one of my classes I devote a lot of time to, many modules to oral language, because it is fascinating and it is always so interesting, even to hear my high school teachers learning about oral language and seeing how it would work in their classroom, and how, yes, we never outgrow that need for oral language. If we look at the simple view of reading, which is, what we're being taught in RISE, right? It's word recognition times language comprehension. A key component of language comprehension is oral language. So if we don't have strong oral language, we're going to have a breakdown there in language comprehension. So the thing about oral language, though, is it's easier to work with than reading, because listening and speaking are automatic skills. We are born with the ability to be able to listen and speak. If you have never seen the TED Talk, The Birth of a Word by Deb Roy, you should go and check that out. It is fascinating. This presenter basically researched their child and documented on video how the child moved from a babble to an actual word. And it's incredible. Oral language is important in phonological development. So think about, in phonological awareness, they need to understand the concept of a word. Oral language. When we get into phonemic awareness, all of those auditory skills, oral language is there. Our vocabulary development, there is a lot of research, and many of you have probably heard this before, about the deficit in oral language from children that live in poverty to ones that don't, because they're not hearing as much oral language. Knowledge development. If you haven't read The Knowledge Gap by Wexler, I'm losing her first name right now. She talks about how, we have a problem right now, and that we need to be building knowledge in our students, because if we think about it and look at our kiddos, the more knowledge they have, the more knowledge they have of a topic that they're reading about, the easier it is for them to read because they know what it is they're going to be reading about. It's hard to read a word or words that you have no idea what they are. Anne Fernald has another great TED Talk, Why Talking to Little Kids Matters. That's another great one to see. I could talk about oral language for a long time, but the big thing that I would say here is if your parents do anything, it should be talk to their kids. If you can encourage that for them to have just conversations with them, they will be doing an incredible amount of work on their literacy skills because they will be developing some of that phonology. They'll be developing vocabulary. They'll be developing their knowledge. They'll be working on strengthening those pathways just by having those conversations. That's all they have to do. You can take care of the rest. Just having them talk. And that's something that any of your parents would be able to do, regardless of SES status or jobs or literacy levels, just talking. And that's why I didn't know this so well when I was teaching in school until I began researching and working on my doctorate. But I like to think that maybe innately some of that came to me because I could not stand a quiet classroom. My kids always had to be talking. If you walked by, it was always, I would like to say a low roar, but maybe it wasn't always low. But my kids were learning. And in the quiet classrooms, you are just taking away that opportunity to build this incredibly important skill. So that good old constructivist learning is still incredibly important. The fourth thing that I wish that I knew is this thing called the science of reading. Nobody had ever said those words. And I tell you, there's a lot of misunderstandings about what these words mean. I don't know if you all have figured it out yet, but learning to read is pretty politicized. And it's very much in the media. And we get these phrases and things get twisted and turned around and you hear it, it's kind of like playing the game of telephone, right? And there's just, it's interesting if you talk with someone and they're saying the science of reading, to ask them, okay, what do you think the science of reading is? Because it would be really interesting to hear what it is they had to say. I bet it would not be all of the things that are encompassed here. This is, and I say that because this is work by the Reading League that they're doing, and they have created a website called What is the Science of Reading? And they are building a repository of what this is and resources. And the very first thing that they're attacking is, what in the world is it? What is a definition? Because we need something to work with, right? So when we look at the definition, it is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. It's research that's been conducted over the last 50 years all across the world, derived from thousands of studies in multiple languages. And what it is it's a preponderance of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop. This evidence showing us why some have difficulty, how we can most effectively assess and teach that good diagnostic teaching, and be able to improve student outcomes through prevention and intervention for reading difficulties. So one great big thing that I noticed that is a myth that I can debunk for some of you today is you didn't hear the word phonics in there, did you? It's a part of it because when we go all the way back to the National Reading Panel and the Big Five, phonics is in there. It's been in there the whole time. So it's always been established as something important. We just haven't been giving it enough work. But the science of reading is not, let's teach them phonics and that's the only thing we're going to teach them. The thing that I really love about it is it's also derived from researchers from all of these different fields. We're looking at psychology, communication sciences. That's why you'll see a lot of overlap in things that your speech language pathologists do. Education, implementation science, linguistics, neuroscience. If you want to see me geek out, let's talk about the brain because I think all of that is incredibly fascinating what goes on in there. So we have lots of fields coming together. It's not just educators. All of these are coming together to see what works. What the science of reading isn't is an ideology or a philosophy. So I think whole language and balanced literacy were more of these, but the science of reading is not that. It's not a fad. It's not a trend. It's not a new idea. We're looking at over 50 years of research. It's not a pendulum swing. Even though reading is very politicized, it's not a political agenda. And if you don't hear anything else from me today, hear that it is not a one-size-fits-all approach. You cannot go out and buy a science of reading program that's scripted, especially, and deliver that to your class as written, no deviation, just reading the script, and all of your students know how to read. That's not how this works. It's not a program of instruction. It's not a single specific component of instruction like phonics. It's this entire body of research that covers all of the aspects of reading, that big five: phonics, phonological awareness, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. All of those are still there because that is what reading is rooted in. The fifth thing that I wish that I had learned, and this would probably be, there are many days that I think I wish I had gotten a speech language pathology degree because boy, would I know a little more about this. So we really need to work with our SLPs because they have an incredible amount of knowledge that is extremely beneficial when working with kids to know how to read. So one thing is that phonemes are altered by co-articulation. So what that means is that when we put two or more speech sounds together, they influence each other. So sometimes that sound is not going to sound the same in every word. This even leads to when we're thinking about dialects and how sounds sound differently. And, my favorite is, working with kids with words like can. Send that out. Can. That's not what we say. We say can. And so that's where we have to think about and understand and know that phonemes are altered by the sounds that are around them. You really see this when you look at a word like bark. So when we think about the sounds, we would typically say b, ark. But that R, even though it's an R controlled vowel, it's still b, a, k. That R controlled vowel together alters the sounds of those letters. It's the whole background behind that bossy R. The sixth thing that I wish that I had known is that there is somewhat of an order to the sounds. So teaching a letter a week or a sound a week and just go through the alphabet A to Z is not necessarily the best idea. I have a link here. If you have not seen UFLI, University of Florida Literacy Institute, they have a lot of resources. So the Florida Center for Reading Instruction, it might be one that you've heard of before, or for reading research, FCRR. And this is a newer developed one, but they give even a suggested scope and sequence. So, you know, that's the other thing, is that we should be using scopes and sequences, and that it's not just about where we find it in literature, but there should be some sort of reason behind what we do. And this graphic is one of the most interesting things that I have seen. And I just saw it this within the past week, and it's on that Facebook group that I told you about. I think it was Pam Kastner that posted it. But this shows you all of the sounds from the front of the mouth to the back of the mouth. So if you say all of these words, you will feel how the way that you make those sounds travels from the lips all the way to from the throat. And so it's really interesting going through and saying all of these and feeling that. You know, these lip sounds are the easiest to teach our kiddos. And when they start getting further back in the throat, they become more difficult. The seventh thing that I learned is that a mirror in a classroom is incredibly powerful, and sound walls. So when I say that about mirrors, I've worked in the field with our interns, and I've worked with them on doing assessment and intervention with kindergartners. And it is amazing how you can correct how a sound is being mispronounced, just by putting a mirror in front of the child. Let them see your mouth, let them look in a mirror and see what their mouth looks like, and figure out if it's the same. And if it's not the same, figure out how to match it. And it's one of those things that helps with letters that are often, or sounds that are often confused, like the f and the v. They're formed in the exact same place in the mouth. It's just one's voiced and one's not voiced. And so being able to use the mirror to see, and also even feeling the throat and the vibration when you're making the sounds, is incredibly powerful when working with kiddos. And then sound walls. So not that word walls are so important, but these sound walls are, and that we're teaching our students sounds and spellings of sounds. And this is arranged here, the consonants, and then you'll often hear it called the vowel valley. Mary Dahlgren is probably the main researcher that many of us in the field look to on sound walls, and she has lots of things out there where she does videos quite often about sound walls and how to use them in the classroom. And she also has developed some really great tools. It's called Tools for Teaching. And she has some really great, beautiful colored cards that show the mouth and so that you can see the shape, along with the letter in the picture. This link is also would be helpful to you. This author talks about how to switch to and use a sound wall in the classroom. But the thing that I really like about this is she talks about what a sound wall is. And here are the benefits of a sound wall. She tells you why it's better than a word wall. And then she goes through all of the steps of how to introduce it, how to set it up. And then I'm trying not to go too fast, but using the sound wall. This is what I really loved. Introducing one sound at a time, questions to ask, being sure not to add the schwa sound. So many of our students, especially us being in Arkansas in the South, we want to add that to the end of our sounds, and that makes it more difficult to blend. So making sure that we don't. I always tell my students we need to clip those sounds and not have that schwa at the end. You're only displaying the sounds that you've taught, using it for daily review. So there's lots of things here. And she even links you to the tools for reading that I talked about. So this would be a great resource for you to check out. The 8th thing that I wish that I knew was dyslexia, and what in the world do we do with those kiddos? I had my first dyslexic student that I knew about when I was teaching 3rd grade. No, I take that back. The first one was when I was teaching 4th grade. And I really didn't know what to do with him, nor did anybody else, because he was an incredibly proficient reader. He was probably the top in the class in reading. But what he couldn't do was spell. And if you saw the way he spelled things, you would never guess that that matched with that reading ability, because it looked like, so he was in 4th grade, probably read on a 6th, 7th grade level. He was reading really big books. But his spelling looked like kindergarten, 1st grade. It was that vast of a difference. And I'm back. Sorry. All right. I'm traveling this week. You know, the one thing, and teachers will get this, we don't really know how to take vacation very well. That misnomer about how we get summers off, haha. So I'm actually taking a vacation. And so, you know, when you use their Wi-Fi, you never know what happens. So hopefully I'm on my hotspot now. We should be good to go. So the student I was talking about was Connor. He was my 3rd grade student, and his mom came to me and told me he had dyslexia. He had a diagnosis, so she was just like, you know, help him. What do we need to be able? What can you do? I had not one clue either. I went to the SPED, self-contained teachers, no clue. No one knew what in the world you did with a kiddo with dyslexia. So I just did the best that I could and what I knew how to do about, good teaching. And thank goodness it didn't harm him. He actually ended up doing pretty well in the long run, but he was really disserviced in that he had made it all of this time to third grade and no one knew what in the world to do with him. And he actually made it quite a long ways before the school and the district was able to figure out what in the world to do. So I definitely wish that we had the resources that we do now about what dyslexia is. So if you haven't checked it out, like Arkansas Ideas has a great series on dyslexia. You can find just rated this even before 2017. This is the updated version. So you'll have a link to this too. And in this dyslexia resource guide, it tells you a whole lot of things that you need to know. It talks about the definition. It shows you indicators. It talks about RTI. And then there's lots of other really great things in here. An early indicators checklist, sample accommodations. This is just a wealth for all those things. Understand legislation. This in the past few years, how important it is to keep up patients for us. And then they make law to legislators and tell them when something that they're trying, is if enough of us come together, we can work to change this legislation. Place to keep up with this is
Sorry to interrupt, Dr.
through,
Thompson. We're not really getting a
this was
lot of what
Chris
you're
All. You all
saying.
hearing me now?
Want to try again?
I hope the third time's the charm. I apologize.
You're good now. It was just kind of choppy and you were talking really slow. But yeah, I think it'll be good now.
Okay. Let me show you this. Where is Melissa? Where was I starting to be choppy at? Did we get through 8?
I think so.
Okay. So I was starting to talk about 9 and that keeping up with legislation is so incredibly important. And so the Department of Ed has this great Google Classroom, Rise Arkansas, that's full of resources for you. But the thing that I really love that's here is this is their reading legislation guidance document that they keep updated. So you don't have to dig in a zillion different places. They have it all right here and they update it frequently. So this was last updated in 2019. So they should be getting ready to do updates from the many things that happened in this last legislative session. It was definitely a busy session. But this gets you through, the professional development that's been required, district responsibilities, how you have to demonstrate that proficiency and awareness, and that we're now it's not just elementary teachers and K-12 SPED, but we're also bringing in literacy specialists that have to have that, which that makes sense. You'll see what educator preparation programs are being required to do, information on licensure. Here are the dyslexia requirements about reporting to parents and school improvement plans, and then curriculum and instructional materials. So this is also a place where if someone says something that you think that can't be right, or you want to dig a little deeper, that you can go and look and see for yourself. And sometimes there are key pieces that are missing when we're talking about different things. So that is a really great place for you to check out. And the 10th thing that I learned, and this I continue to learn as I work with my students every semester, because I find out that people don't necessarily know how to implement RTI. I know that when I was in the classroom, I can speak from my experiences, that we were given a form that we were supposed to fill out, and we used objectives that were straight from the tests that the students were taking at the time. It was the ACTAP. And, those big, long objectives. So, you're putting them on there, and some sort of activity that a parapro with zero training at that time could deliver. And then you might assess and see how it was going. And when it happens like that in districts, it's very easy to understand why people get very frustrated with RTI and think that it's something that doesn't work. I have talked to many schools that tell me, or many students that tell me, our district tried that RTI thing and it didn't work for us, so we're going to do something else. So it's kind of a federal law, so you really have to stick with it. But reach out and get some help if you're having trouble with RTI, because if you really look at how it is set up and follow it the way it was intended, it is incredibly helpful for getting our students help as soon as they need it in a much faster way than they are when we just have to wait for them to be placed in SPED. So just, a real quick thing on RTI. There's a link here to the RTI network. That's a great resource to check out. But just to quickly talk about the tiers, everybody is in tier 1. Tier 1 is all students. It is basic classroom instruction. It is We do universal screening. We're proactive. We deliver quality, research-based core instruction. Tier 1 can also and should also be that you have to differentiate for your students by doing small group work. That's Tier 1. That is good quality classroom instruction. When a student is struggling and classroom instruction isn't working and your differentiated instruction for them, you're being able to work in small groups isn't working, then we should be moving them to Tier 2. Tier 2 is much more targeted and is where students, we've got some risk factors here for some problems. It's a rapid response. It provides additional small group instruction. The thing about Tier 2 is it really should be in a group of like 3 to 5 students. I see in some places Tier 2 is implemented in a group of 15 students, and that's not Tier 2, that's Tier 1. Okay. It really needs to be in a small group setting using research-based materials that follow a scope and sequence. All programs don't work for all kids, and a scripted program is not what's going to make all of our kids magically able to learn how to read. It's not the program, it's the teacher. So we have to have good programs, but we also have to be knowledgeable in what we are doing so that we're able to make adjustments as we need to. So you should be using research-based materials. And if we're using a program like Phonics First or Wilson, those are great programs. But if they're not working, then you need to be trying something else, because maybe just that way isn't working for them. Maybe Connections would be better for them. So that is something to consider. We should not just say it's not working in Tier 2 and immediately move them to Tier 3 if we haven't changed the intervention. So if you're providing intervention in one way and it's not working, then you should change it and try something else to make sure it's not the intervention and that it's indeed a deeper problem. And then we move into Tier 3. And this is the one that probably makes me the craziest, because Tier 3 is not special education. That makes me get a little bit on my soapbox, and I'm going to try not to. It is the step before special education. So you can start doing some testing here or start referring for testing, but you have to at least try and see if this works before assuming that the child needs SPED. I think if you talk to any SPED teacher, they will tell you that in some places we incredibly over-identify. So that's something that we really need to watch for. In Tier 3, that should be ideally with a specialist or a trained interventionist, and ideally in a one-to-one setting. And I know that is incredibly hard because of resources. You could go up to 3 students. I would not do more than 3 students in a Tier 1. These students also need evidence-based progress monitoring, and they need evidence-based, practices being used, and very frequent progress monitoring. And if Tier 3 is not working, then we move into, we need to do some testing. Now, the one thing that kind of upsets the apple cart here is dyslexia. So at any time you think that a child has significant markers or characteristics for dyslexia, you can have them tested. You should not wait until they've made it all the way to Tier 3 if you have seen a lot of characteristics. The other thing is, and this is something that I find a lot of teachers don't know, parents have a lot of power. So you may fight and fight and fight and fight and fight to get a child tested because you just know it. and maybe you don't have enough evidence or documentation. If that parent requests it, they have to be tested. Parents are powerful. So have a good line of communication with your parents. Use that judiciously. You know, if you start having all of your parents requesting it, you know, unless they're all placing, you might get asked a few questions. But I have had to do that before, and it doesn't do anything but benefit the student and get them the help that they need. Okay, so what thoughts do you all have? What questions do you have about things that I talked today? My top 10 burning things that I wish that I knew, or anything that I could help you with today. You can put it in the chat box, or you can unmute and speak out, whichever is fine with me.
Could you talk more about when you would refer for formal special ed testing? Would it be after dyslexia intervention or tier 3 was not working
Yes.
to have the diagnosis?
So to refer for formal testing, I would want to see if tier 3 was working. So I would at least give that a couple of weeks to see if there's any movement at all. Any movement is good. So definitely there. If a student is, you see that they have a lot of markers for dyslexia, then anybody should be able to be screened. If they fail the screener, then that automatically should get them tested. If for some reason they don't fail the screener, but you still feel strongly, I would be documenting that, and I would be talking to the parents. And if you felt like you still saw things, then I would do that request for testing. You know, the things about screeners is there's false negatives and there's false positives. They're really smart. They're compensators, especially our ones that have struggled. They have figured out how to hide in that classroom, some of them, and get away with not knowing, and to protect themselves for a long time. And then you have some that know they can read and they can spell, they just might not test very well. So the screener should not be the end all and be all. Even if they pass that screener, if you still feel strongly, they should be assessed for dyslexia. You don't have to go through the whole IEP process, or you shouldn't have to for a dyslexia screening. You should be able to work that through your RTI team. Does that help? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. You're welcome. Any other questions? Well, if you think of anything, oh wait, I see the chat box. Let's see here. Oh, she's telling you about, Melissa posted it in our chat box about how the sessions are recorded and they'll be available on the YouTube session or YouTube channel, excuse me. There's more sessions available this summer. There's a link there for you, and that you will get your PD certificate in your email within 24 to 48 hours. You do get 2 hours of credit. If you don't have questions, I'm not going to hold you for your whole 2 hours. I feel quite confident that you are doing other things that you should be getting credit for. So take that. I will stay around for a few minutes if anyone has questions. The last plug that I have again is for our graduate programs. Don't forget to check us out if you are interested in any of these, bumping yourself up on the pay scale, getting another endorsement, or getting your master's degree. And then there is my email address. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I love to help schools and teachers and classes. I like to stay connected to the classroom. I think it's incredibly important for us to stay connected with students and classrooms so that we are always doing the work. So I am happy to help in any way that I can. Addie, it's good to see you. I see you have a great question there. Some book recommendations I'd love to share. I tell you, I have a stack I could recommend. So let me think of a few. The first one is, if you haven't read Kilpatrick's Understanding and Assessing and Preventing Reading Difficulties, that one I think you all get in Rice. But if you haven't read it, that should be your number one book that you read. I really love Dr. Kilpatrick's work, and he's very, very good. So that is one that I would suggest. If you haven't read The Knowledge Gap that I talked about earlier by Natalie Wexler, that is a great one. Louisa Moats has Speech to Print. That is a wonderful one, especially when thinking about phonology. And she has a new edition out. Let's see. Anita Archer has Explicit Instruction. Great text. Louise Spear Swirling has a text on reading profiles and RTI. It is wonderful. I use that in one of my courses, and it always gets rave reviews because it really goes into that RTI even more, and looking at our students and the different reading profiles and ways to help group them. So that's another good one. A new one that's out that I'm starting is The Writing Revolution. So if writing is something that you need in your classroom, that is another great one to check out. I believe Natalie Wexler helped contribute to that text that I talked about, that did the knowledge gap. I'm trying to picture what's all on my end table. If you're really interested in dyslexia, in that same series of the Preventing, Assessing, and Overcoming Reading by the Kilpatrick text, there's a text by Nancy Mather that's on dyslexia assessment and intervention. That's a good one. Let's see. Scanning. If you have not become a member of the Reading League, they have a wonderful journal that is written with the teacher in mind. So it's not like real jargony and technical, and they're very good reads. And so that's a journal that I highly recommend. If you go to the International Dyslexia Association's website, they now have a free area on there that has all of past articles available. I go there all the time. There's always something worth checking out. Trying to think. Oh, if you haven't, so there's a lot of spelling rules, and it's always kind of crazy and why things happen this way. Denise Eide, EIDE, Uncovering the Logic of English. I think everyone should have that on their shelf as a resource. I will tell you, it's so good that I have used it in class. And I've always told the students that they're going to be reading a book of spelling rules, waiting for the flaming emails that were going to come after me for how boring that must be. But they all loved it. They were all fascinated. So, you know, if someone can make a book of spelling rules exciting, it's definitely worth reading. And if you didn't find anything in that list of texts, I can definitely dig around and find you some more. Oh, the new one. Let's see. I know, I thought of another. But it's the last one, I promise. But there's a new one, especially if your teachers are still shifting from balanced literacy. It's called Shifting the Balance. And it talks about the moving from balanced literacy to the science of reading. And it is a fantastic text and a quick read. Any other questions? Okay, well, I will hang around for a few minutes if you have anybody thinks of anything else. Otherwise, feel free to reach out, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And I thank you for coming and spending your morning with me.